In the last week of October 1898, a shift boss named Anton Kessler climbed down a new drift above the Yankee Fork in Custer County, Idaho, carrying a candle and a hand level, checking grade before the night crew came on. He was 31, German-born, 6 years in that district, and known on the payroll for one thing: he did not report trouble that was not there. The drift had been driven that summer to chase a silver-lead vein through country rock the miners called hard ground, grey quartzite laced with old fracture lines that had given the crews nothing but broken drill steel for 3 months. At around 40 feet past the last set of timber, Kessler's candle went out. Not blown out. Starved, the way a flame dies when the air around it changes. He relit it twice before he understood the draft was coming toward him, out of solid rock that, by every map the company owned, had no opening on the other side of it. He put his hand flat against the face. It was cold in a way the rest of the drift was not. Kessler did not go further that night. He marked the spot with a chalk cross and went back up the ladder, and the thing he told the superintendent the next morning is the thing 3 separate people wrote down in 3 separate years, and none of them altered a word of it. He said the mountain was breathing. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. The rock in that stretch of the Yankee Fork is not a mystery to anyone who has worked it. It is Idaho batholith granite, overlain by quartzite and slate, folded and faulted by a mountain-building event that finished its business tens of millions of years before anything walked upright on this continent. It does not contain caves in the limestone sense, because there is almost no limestone in that formation to dissolve into one. What it does contain, and what every driller in that district knew from bitter experience, are fracture zones, cracks and gouged seams where movement in the rock left a weakness, sometimes a few inches wide, sometimes open enough to swallow a drill steel and never give it back. A fracture zone can carry air. It can carry water. What it does not do, in granite that has sat unmoved and undisturbed since before there was a name for Idaho, is carry a draft strong enough to kill a candle flame at 40 feet, because a draft like that requires 2 things: a source of moving air and a second opening somewhere else for that air to be moving toward. The company's own survey showed nothing: no adit, no shaft, no natural vent anywhere on that face of the mountain, in any direction, for over 1,000 feet. The crew broke through 6 days later, on November the 4th. The round was set conservatively, half the usual charge, because by then every man on that shift had heard what Kessler felt, and nobody wanted to be standing close to a rock face that was already doing something rock is not supposed to do. When the smoke cleared and they went back in, the drift face was gone, and in its place was an opening roughly 5 feet across, not ragged the way blasted rock breaks, but bordered on 3 sides by a surface too even to have been made by the powder. The 4th side was open air, and past it the candle flame did not merely lean. It lay down flat. Ordinary drift blasting in that district left a face of shattered quartzite, sharp-edged, uneven, studded with drill marks where the steel had bitten before the powder went off. What the crew found on the morning of November the 4th was not that. Along 3 edges of the new opening, the broken rock gave way abruptly to a surface with no drill marks and no fracture lines at all, a plane so consistent that a man could lay a straight edge along 4 feet of it and find no gap wide enough to slide a coin under. The powder had not cut that surface. It had simply uncovered where the surface already ended. What survives from the days that followed comes from 3 accounts that never crossed paths until decades later. Anton Kessler dictated his to a Boise newspaperman in 1931, when he was 64 and past caring what people thought of him. A timberman named Olaf Sandvik wrote to a cousin in Minnesota on November the 9th, 1898, 5 days after the breakthrough, a letter that stayed folded in a hymnal for most of a century. And a company clerk named Ruth Pemberton, 19 years old and the only literate woman on that payroll, kept a private diary that her grandniece eventually donated to a county historical society in 1988. None of the 3 had any reason to coordinate a story, and none of them needed to. The details line up because the details were simply there to be seen. All three describe a passage roughly 7 feet wide and just under 6 feet high, running level into the mountain on a bearing that matched neither the drift behind it nor the fold of the rock around it. The walls were not raw stone. They were faced, in a material none of the three could name, dense and dark grey, fitted so closely along the seams that Sandvik wrote he ran a knife blade the length of his forearm along one joint and never found a gap wide enough to catch the point. Pemberton's diary describes the floor as smooth underfoot, almost polished, sloping gently downward and away from the drift, at a grade she compared to a plank set on a low sawhorse. Down its center ran a shallow groove, straight, a few inches wide, running back into the dark exactly the way the corridors found later in Oregon and Nebraska would run, though nobody in Custer County in 1898 had any way of knowing that, and nobody who found either of those later corridors had ever heard of Custer County. The company's chief engineer, a Cornishman named Peter Trewartha, with 20 years underground in 3 states, was sent for on November the 6th. Trewartha's job, in the plainest terms, was rock, and he had never in his career failed to explain what a mountain was doing. He spent 2 full days at that face. He measured the passage with a chain and a transit borrowed from the county surveyor. He found the walls plumb to within a fraction of an inch, over the full height, the corners square, the floor grade constant the entire distance he was able to walk it, before the passage narrowed and dropped away into water. He noted, in the one page of his field notes that has ever surfaced, that the facing material took a compass needle the way iron ore does, deflecting it steadily rather than jumping to it, which is not a behavior granite exhibits, and not a behavior any lead-silver ore in that district had ever exhibited either. He wrote one further sentence, in a hand the county archivist has confirmed is his. The passage was finished before the mountain closed around it, not cut into a mountain that was already there. Trewartha measured the groove down the center of the floor as well, and his notes give it a width just under 4 inches, running dead level along a line that ignored the pitch of the passage itself, as though it had been set to carry water on its own terms rather than follow the grade the builders had given the floor around it. He traced it as far as his rope allowed and found no branch, no junction, no variation in its width the entire distance, the same consistency Ruth Pemberton had already noted with a piece of string and her own 2 hands 3 days earlier. Trewartha did not finish his report. The company ledger for that mine, kept without a missed day for the 11 years prior, is blank for November the 7th, 8th, and 9th, 1898. The next entry, dated November the 10th, is in a clerk's hand, not the superintendent's, and records only ordinary tonnage figures, as though the preceding 3 days had simply not occurred on that property. Ruth Pemberton's diary, by contrast, records exactly what happened in that gap. She writes that Trewartha went in alone on the morning of the 7th, with a lantern and a length of rope tied off at the entrance, and that he was down past where the rope's slack ran out for the better part of an hour. She writes that when he came back up the drift, he did not speak to the superintendent first. He asked one question of Kessler, who had been posted at the entrance the whole time. He asked how long the draft had been blowing that direction. Then he sat on a timber and did not say anything else for close to a quarter of an hour. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. The mine superintendent, a Chicago-financed operator named Charles Ordway, who had sunk considerable money into that vein on the promise of silver, did what a mining company in 1898 always did when a working face turned into a liability. On November the 11th, he declared the drift unsafe on account of loose ground, which by then was arguably true, since the crew had been standing in a section of mountain nobody could account for. He ordered the passage timbered off, and the drift behind it caved deliberately, the same method used to abandon any played-out working in that district. It took 2 men one day. By the evening of November the 12th, the opening, the corridor, the groove down its center, and whatever lay beyond the point where the water rose, were under an estimated 60 feet of collapsed rock and mine waste, and the drift was marked on the company map as worked out. Nobody had to silence anybody. Nobody had to threaten a soul or burn a single page. All the company had to do was call a dangerous thing dangerous, which cost them nothing, and which every miner on that payroll understood without being told twice. Peter Trewartha never filed the report he had promised. His personnel record with that company ends on November the 13th, 1898, with a single line noting his resignation, no reason given, no dispute recorded. He did not go back into mining. County records in Haley show a Peter Trewartha operating a hardware and feed store from 1900 until his death in 1922, a considerable distance, professionally and geographically, from the only work he had ever known. His original field notes, the ones the company would have owned as a matter of course, are not in the mining company's surviving papers, which are otherwise complete for that decade. The one page that has surfaced came from a private collection, sold at an estate auction in Twin Falls in 2006, and its present owner has allowed it to be photographed twice and has declined every request to have it tested. That shaft, in Custer County, was not the only place in that decade where a mountain opened onto something it should not have contained. In 1889, a silver mine near Silver City in the Owyhee Range struck what the shift log recorded only as a squared void, encountered while drifting toward a known vein, and the foreman on that shift ordered the face timbered and the drift abandoned within 4 days of the discovery, no ore having been found to justify the delay. The shift log survives. The foreman's own account of what the void contained does not, because no such account was ever written down for anyone but the men who saw it, and they were not the kind of men whose word carried past the saloon. In 1903, a prospecting party sinking a shaft near Atlanta in the Sawtooth Range abandoned the hole after 11 days of work when they struck, at a depth their own notes describe as impossible for that formation, a facing of dark fitted stone, running at an angle. The shaft had not been sunk to follow. The claim was sold within the month, the new owner filled the shaft with waste rock inside the year, and no assay was ever recorded for whatever material had been struck. What is consistent across all 3 sites is not the ore, because none of them ever produced ore worth the name. What is consistent is the shape of the response, a discovery, a short, intense period of examination by exactly the kind of professional equipped to explain it, a ceiling, framed as routine safety, executed within days, and a career, in every case, quietly ended or quietly redirected, without a single accusation ever leveled at anyone. What is also consistent, in all 3 Idaho cases, is who was standing there when the sealing order came down. Not a company clerk, not a mine owner watching his investment. In every instance, it was the one man on the property whose entire training was built around reading rock, a shift boss, an engineer, a foreman with 2 decades underground, and in every instance that man's professional judgment is the piece of the record that goes missing afterward, while the ordinary paperwork of tonnage and payroll continues on, undisturbed, as though nothing about that week had required a second thought from anyone. None of that proves what the men who stood in those passages believed. It only shows a pattern, and the pattern is the same one that would surface again in a landslide above an Oregon canyon in 1911, and again under a Nebraska wheat field stripped bare by a dust storm in 1938, in country hundreds of miles from Custer County and from each other, among people who never read one another's stories and never had the chance to compare notes. A corridor faced in fitted stone, a groove cut down its center, a level floor ignoring the shape of the ground above it. 3 states, 3 decades apart, the same architecture surfacing each time only because the ground itself gave way first, and closing again within days of the men who found it. What remains of the Yankee Fork passage is what the mountain has kept for itself. The shaft and drift were never reopened. The property changed hands 4 times over the following century, mined intermittently for lead and zinc, and no subsequent owner's records mention the corridor at all, as though the entire event had been struck from the property's memory along with Trewartha's report. A single specimen survives, a fist-sized fragment of the dark-facing material, kept since 1898 in the Kessler family and passed down through 4 generations, currently in the possession of a great-granddaughter in Boise, who has allowed it to be weighed and photographed, but has refused, so far, to have it cut. It is heavier than granite of the same size by a margin any hand can feel. It does not match, in composition or finish, any building stone quarried anywhere in Idaho, then or now. 2 photographs are known to exist from that November. One shows the drift entrance with a lantern set on a timber for scale, the squared opening just visible past a man's shoulder. The other, taken closer, shows a section of the facing wall and the groove running down the floor in front of it, before the timbering went up. Both were kept by the Pemberton family for most of a century and were shown, once, to a geologist at a university in Idaho in 2004, on the understanding that his name would not be attached to any statement. He said the facing material in the second photograph was denser than any granite or quartzite native to that formation, and that its surface finish was consistent with grinding rather than natural fracture, and he stopped there, adding only that a hand specimen would settle the question in an afternoon, and that he did not expect to ever be handed one. Anton Kessler worked that district another 11 years and never once asked to be assigned to a drift again, taking surface work instead for the rest of his working life, a considerable step down in wages that he never explained to his employer and rarely explained to his own family. He told the Boise newspaperman in 1931 that what he remembered was not the cold, and it was not the facing stone, and it was not even the draft. It was the candle, lying flat in air that was moving towards something on the far side of 60 feet of caved granite. Air that had been moving in that direction, by every account, since before anyone standing in that drift had been born. A mountain does not breathe on its own. Something underneath the Yankee Fork was doing the breathing, and in the autumn of 1898, 4 men stood close enough to feel it, sealed it behind 60 feet of waste rock inside of a week, and went back to work as though the mountain had told them exactly as much as it was ever going to. In the summer of 1956, a mining engineer surveying old claims along the Yankee Fork for a proposed tailings operation flagged the Kessler-era workings as unsuitable for reopening, citing unstable ground and poor documentation. His report, filed with the State Land Board, makes no mention of any prior incident, only a note that the original company maps for that section were incomplete and that 2 adjoining claims had been quietly consolidated under a single owner sometime before 1920. That owner's name does not appear on any tax record before or after the transaction. A retired assay clerk from Chalice, interviewed by a local radio station in 1979 for an unrelated piece on the district's mining history, mentioned in passing that older residents used to say the ground above that stretch of the Yankee Fork ran a few degrees colder than the surrounding slope in winter, enough that snow held longer there than anywhere else on the mountain. He was not asked to elaborate, and the interview moved on to ore prices. No one has measured that stretch of ground since, and the claim itself has sat unworked for over 60 years. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.